I'm Billy Hollowell, and on this bonus episode of Generation Indoctrination, I'll sit down with our show's host, Brandon Showalter, as well as Taylor Reece, a filmmaker behind the movie Dead Name. We'll discuss the film's powerful message and the broader implications of the transgender debate. So Taylor, thanks so much for joining us. I wanna just start with Dead Name, this film that you have put together, and I know a lot of hard work and dedication went into this, but why did you make this film?
This film needed to be made because there are parents suffering all over the nation and the world who need to be heard. And we had a great, particularly at the time when I started this, there was a great imbalance in terms of a dialogue around the topic of what it means for a parent to absorb and react to the news when a child says, I'm trans. We didn't have, as a culture or society, a long time playbook for something like this, because unlike previous, I don't know what to call them exactly, but unlike previous social contagions or trends or evolutions within the childhood realm, we've never had anything that put a child on a track toward medicalization, toward changing their physical bodies. And so this was different. And what was striking to me, and I had seen it in my community around me, was that parents who were, let's say, affirming or willing to encourage their children or accept this news or go along with this news, they had a place to feel accepted. Parents who were skeptical, parents who did not really believe that this was true of their children, parents who were frightened about the prospect of medicalization had to go underground. And this was really the motivation for me, was to give voice to a group of people who were literally hiding in chat groups, hiding their identities, finding themselves isolated, and unable to find support where they normally would have expected it.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in there because it is interesting, and I want to get your perspective on this in a moment, Brandon. But, as a journalist looking at how we tell stories, and all of these people deserve to have their stories told, but yet we don't hear the stories, as you're saying. We definitely don't hear from the parents who don't want to affirm or who are trying to navigate this and trying to understand what's going on. And we certainly don't hear very much. I mean, we're starting to hear more because of people like Brandon and others willing to tell the stories, but of people who detransition, right? It's this one narrative that is out there, and only that narrative can be told. And so, Brandon, before we come back to you, Taylor, because I want to get into some of what you discovered and some of the patterns here when you were putting Dead Name together that really stunned you. But Brandon, as a journalist, what do you make of that restriction of the storylines when it comes to this topic?
Well, Billy, one of the things that I often say, and I've talked about this with Taylor at length in the course of doing media for this film, but even when we initially spoke, is we spoke of the ideological capture of the media, of the professions. And one of the recurring themes throughout the Dead Name film, and you see this, is how all of the people who were, in the case of Bill, who's one of the parents profiled, the film profiles 3 parents, Amy, Helen, and Bill. They all go to professionals for help when their children make this announcement. In Bill's case, he went to a psychiatrist at the hospital. Helen, who was a mom of a little boy named Jonas, there was a counselor there who, the therapist going along with this. In Amy's case, her daughter went and saw a doctor at a Planned Parenthood and was prescribed testosterone within 30 minutes of a telehealth consultation. And so the institutional, push towards this dogma, towards gender ideology, can't be overstated because it is everywhere. And so parents are left confused and rattled and terrified. because they love their children more than anyone. But I think in the media, with regard to the narrative, they are, in my view, most culpable because they have sort of formed a phalanx around all of the professionals that are pushing this on families. The media has set the tone, and they don't allow dissenting voices or any kind of nuance because they would prefer that this be framed as sort of a right wing versus left wing dynamic, when really the truth is much more complex. As you know, Billy, I get phone calls from very left wing people, non-religious people, atheist people, and, your conservative, religious people too. I mean, I hear from moms and dads from across the political spectrum here. This is not a right versus left fight. And I think the Dead Name film really humanizes the issue from the parents' perspective, because it is apolitical. It's not a slick or provocative film. It doesn't get into the politics of it at all. And, just as another anecdote, I'd just add that when I've talked to parents, one of the things that they've consistently told me is that, nobody really even cares about politics when your kids are in jeopardy. They just want to save them and prevent them from being physically harmed. They don't want there to be irreversible medical damage done to their bodies. And so all politics sort of fades away. But unfortunately, the legacy press, the corporate media doesn't seem interested in telling those stories. And so that's why it's been up to me and a handful of others who are, if I do say so myself, intellectually honest enough to say, no, wait a minute, let's back up here. The truth is a lot more layered than many would have us believe.
So Taylor, having heard all of that, going into what you experienced, when you put a film together like this, you are encountering some really tough stories and you're putting them all together into one thing, which in this case, again, we're talking about the film Dead Name. Once this was done and you heard these stories, what were some of the things that most resonated with you or maybe even disturbed you, maybe even commonalities in what you were hearing?
So the interesting thing is, if you look at Amy, Helen, and Bill, or even their stories, you would say, my gosh, what do these three parents have in common? And at first glance, you might say nothing. But the truth is that the plight of a 4-year-old boy being trans by one parent, the plight of a 16-year-old girl who suddenly announces that she's trans, and the circumstances surrounding a young college-age boy who puts his life in jeopardy to take cross hormones. What they have in common are parents who initially are stunned and blindsided, who could not see this coming, who were not armed and prepared to deal with the fallout, who felt isolated and had nowhere to turn, none of whom are particularly radicalized in their politics. Okay, as Brandon was saying, these are not people who are hewing to a cultural or political narrative. These were all parents who suddenly found themselves in a stunning and really unwanted position of trying to figure out how not to lose their child, protect their child, fend against the forces all around them. What's in common is the dizzying experience, the feeling that you're not on terra firma anymore, that all that you had once held to be true suddenly dissipates. That as I said before, that where you would expect to find support and solid ground, most notably within the immediate family, and then let's say at the schools, all these places where people seek comfort when they expect to have community around them, all of this collapses and gives way. And the three parents, in the way that we weave their stories together and in the way that they tell their stories, you can see how everything that's fundamental and seemingly sound for them falls apart. And what they're trying to do simply is protect their child, and they feel like the tools that they would normally rely on become unavailable to them. So that's really what we found, and in the way that we wove their stories together, it may be subtle, but what the experience that each of them has is actually a similar arc or a similar trajectory. And so we go back and forth among the three parents, but really the story and the arc is the same in terms of the shock, the endeavor to understand, to cope, to seek help, and then trying to figure out how they're going to accept what is coming their way or what comes their way. I don't want to give a spoiler alert, but we have one parent who I guess still walks away with some hope because she has a young child, and another who doesn't. So but the stories are fundamentally the same. And so what we wanted to do with the film was we wanted to show the parent experience and to let the world know that there's an alternative parent experience to the one that we've seen in the media ad nauseum for 10 years, where parents are just so cheerful about their child announcing that they're trans and how they assist them with the clothing, with the haircut, eventually into the medical setting. And, they're there when they have a double mastectomy or whatever or they're on hormones, or the female child grows a beard. I mean, that's what we've seen. We've seen parents championing this, but that's half the story. Maybe it's less than half the story. There's another side to the story. It just, as Brandon was saying, the mainstream media has developed an allergy toward being able to tell both sides of this story. And I really can't think of another instance where the media has gone just blind to one half of a story. I find this extraordinary.
Well, and, there's another side to this too. And, when we talk about the 50-50 or less than 50, when it comes to parents, gleefully welcoming this in, when the media and culture is only giving you one narrative, you have a situation where you're almost manipulated into having to feel that way because you think, well, if I don't, this is how normal people react, right? If this is the only thing I'm seeing, if I don't react this way, then I'm reacting abnormally, right? And so it's really fascinating what you've done with Dead Name, which is to open up those stories, not just as quick headlines that you read, but to really be able to see what these parents are going through. And these are parents who are not taking the approach that the media is telling them they have to take or they should take. And so I do wonder how many people wouldn't take that approach if they weren't so indoctrinated with only that one thing for the past decade that they've seen. Now, Brandon, just, for you've been involved in a lot of projects and a lot of documentaries, a number of documentaries now. You have your own podcast on this topic, obviously, here where you discuss this. What for you was different about Dead Name? What was unique about this?
Well, this was such an honor for me to participate in this film. I make a brief appearance because the film is about profiling these parents and telling their stories, giving them a voice. But Taylor had seen a speech that I'd given in the summer of 2020 and reached out and asked if I would consider being a contributor to it. And of course I said yes. And it was special for me because, Billy, I can't tell you how many parents I've heard from in the past 6.5 years since I've been on this beat, moms and dads who've called me just absolutely at their wits' end, completely shocked and reeling and confused and sometimes sobbing because they are trying desperately to save their children. Countless parents. I don't know how. I couldn't count the number of people I've heard from. And so it was, I kind of feel like watching the film that Taylor put together was just kind of a snapshot into many of the stories that I've heard on the phone. And so to be a part of that was very special because it's very familiar to me. I've obviously, in addition to writing articles and doing podcasts, I'm sort of a counselor slash pastor of sorts for people who are just trying to navigate this. And it's gotten to the point where I've got a list of resources. I'm being inundated with them, and I just try to connect them with other people sort of behind the scenes as they're seeking help. But I think that this film is special because of how it really takes a different tone than some of the other films that are out there. I mean, I think it is easy for people to become angry about these issues because I would share this view that these are medical experiments. They are medical atrocities being perpetrated on children and young people. And, I have heard from people who have watched Dead Name, and it's made them very angry because of how these families were so badly treated, mistreated, and just undermined at every turn. And that does make some people angry. But unlike other films, I think what this one does is just allow people into the journeys of these families. It makes them, you can introduce criticism of this with sadness. And not that Taylor's manipulating people, she's certainly not. But when you have kind of an intimate portrait glimpse, fly on the wall kind of lens on the situation, I think it's easier to persuade people about what this is really all about than it is with other films that just kind of showcase the atrocities for what they are. There are pictures, there are brief moments in Dead Name where you do see some of the carnage of the medical experiments. There's a shot of, a woman who's undergone a double mastectomy, a young person, and that kind of gruesome photo always does sort of evoke a visceral reaction. But the film is very quiet and intimate and haunting, and I just think it's more persuasive that way. And so I was really honored to participate in it. And it's, these parents are really suffering and they need a voice. And I think Taylor really knocked it out of the park at giving them one.
Well, and I don't know, Taylor, I'll throw this one to you, but we can all kind of talk through it because, what seems to be happening right now is you now have states around the country that are reacting to this in different ways, right? You have the New Yorks and the Californias of the world who are going to behave in ways in which maybe parental rights of some of the parents that you've even highlighted here would be usurped. And then you have states like Florida where restrictions are going to be placed and have been placed on child transitions or this quote unquote treatment, for this issue. It's intriguing to me to now see President Joe Biden speaking on this. In fact, he said this week that it's cruel and close to sinful for Florida to do what they're doing on this issue when it comes to child transitions, and went on to say in an interview with The Daily Show that he would actually like to see legislation passed, just like it was done on same-sex marriage, where basically he said, quote, if you mess with that, you're breaking the law and you're going to be held accountable. So it seemed he was pushing for legislation that would essentially, ensure that child transitions were something that could be protected and happen anywhere in the country. So it seems like we've really moved into this legislative battle on this, but I don't know if you want to reflect on that at all in light of the stories that you're telling, right? Because how does that affect parents like this who are trying to protect their children?
It is unfortunate that we have to legislate common sense. It is unfortunate that we have forgotten that parental rights is at the heart of how we became a nation, just as civil rights are as well. This extremism is probably going to help me sell film. It's probably going to help me boost sales and rentals of my film because the issue is going to be appropriated by every politician who's recognizing that this is going to be a signature issue for the 2024 election. And unfortunately, it's going to be like a dose of exploitation on top of the exploitation. It will, on the upside, it at least is going to bring the issue into the sunlight. at least there are going to be many, 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 many more people who will be paying attention to the issue, and maybe some want to have a serious conversation along the way. And certainly, many parents will have much more of a first aid kit to be prepared for something like this on the upside. The downside is, can we continue to live in two different countries where abortion is okay in half the country and it's not okay in the other half? Is it really okay to start trying to legislate from the state down, from the top down, what is instructed in classrooms? I mean, is it really okay? And with Biden, I'll put that one down to just pure rhetoric. I mean, Democrat or Republican, he's very out of touch with that issue. The Republicans have, I would say, genuinely recognized the danger of a subject, but in attempting to legislate it, it creates a whole other set of problems for those who are truly affected by this, which is parents. This really should be coming down to a discussion on parental rights. When you send a child to elementary school, I mean, you have to sign off on whether or not they can be administered aspirin in the classroom, or whether they can take a class trip to the bagel shop down the street to see how bagels are made. The fact that the schools can take control of a child's identity seems to be pretty much in conflict with what the general philosophy is at schools. So we need a reckoning, but I am very, very worried about the increased polarization in terms of trying to reach consensus on this issue. Even if I technically agree that maybe I agree that gender studies don't belong in kindergarten through 8th grade. Maybe I believe that. But then what does it open the door for? Then it opens the door for critical race theory and all these other things, and they all become attached to each other. And then the true issue of the medicalization gets drowned out. And so where are we? We're in like this miasma of still trying to claw our way into some clarity on something that's so very specific and not necessarily related to all these other things. And just there was one last thing that I wanted to just add to that. Now I'll hand it over to Brandon. But one last thing I wanted to add to that is, the T attached itself to the LBG, and that's how. And it was very sort of clever political move, because then everything that they wanted became part of the larger civil rights conversation. And that, I think, set us on this course in the first place. So in every way that we overdo this issue, I actually think the medicalization starts to become co-opted with everything else. And I don't know how we sort this through. I mean, we're going to probably be talking about this for a decade. I think that we've lost one generation of children. Will we lose a second generation while we fight about this for another decade? I don't know.
Yeah, you raise a lot of important points there too, because no matter what the legislation is, even if we think we agree with any of it, right, you have to sit down and talk it through and really understand implications, and not just direct implications, but what can happen as a result of it, and who else can use it, right, or something else later on too. So it is much more complicated than it seems on paper, for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that too, Billy. And I would just add that, even well-intended legislation that may do some good, there are court challenges that happen. Then there are, there's different issues within certain states that have, they're tailored sort of differently. It is, I think a lot of people, because again, I hear from a broad swath of folks, Republicans and Democrats alike, who generally agree that they want this experimental medicalization highly, highly restricted or either completely banned. But then comes the challenge of, well, how do we go about it? What's the best approach? Do we remove the licenses of the doctors that are doing it? Do we assign criminal penalties? Do we have the medical board review it? Or should we do it through the state legislature? Or do we give detransitioners the right to sue for medical malpractice for 20 years statute of limitations? it's a big giant mess, and I think one way or the other, when we speak of the medicalization and the damage that has been done to so many young people, there's got to be some sort of recourse for them. I think that's universally agreed upon. The question is, what's the most prudent way to go forward? But I think before we can even think about the most prudent way to go forward, we do need to hear from those who've been impacted. And even more than the young people who have had their bodies irreparably altered, and if they've gone on hormones, possibly they've been sterilized. I think even the family rupture, which is showcased so beautifully in Dead Name, those are the stories we haven't heard from so much. We're starting to hear from detransitioners more as they've been speaking increasingly, even in some mainstream outlets. But it's the families that I think that's actually where the most potent pain is. And so before we even consider what to do legislatively or through medical boards or through our elected representatives, we need to hear from these moms and dads. And that's the beauty of this film. I think that's going to really clue people in as to what this is really all about and the harm that it has caused.
If I just want to say that, if the grassroots effort could stay focused and not become about everything else, if it can become organized in the same way that, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers got organized, if it can become about the medicalization alone, I think there's a lot more chance of seeing positive change from a grassroots effort than from this top-down, politically motivated, throw legislation out there, gain political points, and then what? We're gonna have two different countries in terms of how children are raised. Where does it stop?
Yeah. Well, and it seems, look, the implications here, and these are obvious, right? But, you have a situation where young children could have something done to them. And it's one thing to say, well, the parents have the right to do it because, you talk about parental rights. That's a complicated arena. Parents can't do everything they want to do. There are limits, and the government does step in. But to your point, it is hard to know where that cap is. I think the struggle with this issue is that a decision that a parent makes for a child based on what a child is saying they feel or think, that decision could be permanent for them, right? That there's no going back from it, and they may regret it later on, and there's no hope of a reversal in many cases. And so I think what you've done here is you've opened up stories to be told and stories to be heard and perspectives that have not been heard in this, which I think is one of the most powerful things that can be done. Really shame on the media for not telling these stories. And I think we're going to see more of the stories be told. A lot of it's going to happen through litigation and things like that, of people who tragically do have regret and are now trying to hold others accountable. But I do think it's so important that we talk about those limitations when it comes to laws and regulations and how this is handled. I was very troubled to hear the president say that, because I thought, well, gosh, what would that mean for those parents, right? But I think you brought up the other issues as well on the other side. So a lot to think about here. Any final words from you on this, Brandon? And then we'll go to you, Taylor.
The only final words I have is that I think everybody does really need to go watch this film. You can find it at deadnamedocumentary.com. It's a small fee to watch, but indie filmmakers are filling a very crucial truth-telling void left by our media. I have long believed, and this is not a legal statement, but that the journalistic malpractice has enabled the medical malpractice. And so, I know I haven't seen any good rulings in a court sense about what, med mal on that front, but the journalistic corruption of using words to distort the truth, using, euphemisms and politically correct lingo to twist public perceptions in service to ideological aims of the gender dogmatists. Like, that has been, I think this is as much a medical scandal, a media scandal, as it is a medical scandal. And so I really don't think we can allow the media to memory hold this once this gender spell breaks off of our institutions. But it's filmmakers like Taylor who've just done such a yeoman's work of showcasing the stories that the media has refused to do thus far, and that we need to support independent journalists and filmmakers who have dug into these stories and gone into the miry depths and the fire to bring, accounts like Helen's and Amy's and Bill's to light. You really need to support work like this because it's the truth. And the truth, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or a Christian or non-religious person or whatever and however you land, the truth is always true no matter who says it. And the truth is not contingent upon our belief in it. It's always true. But, for those who are actually doing the hard work to tell it, support those people because it's lonely out here. And I just believe in this film. Go see it, deadnamedocumentary.com.
Taylor, how about you? Any final words?
Well, I just think that, and from the feedback that we've had, I think that we've given parents license to feel what they already know they feel, and license to know what they know in their hearts to be true, and permission to ask questions and not to feel so defeated. My last plea to the world is pay attention, educate yourself, and be involved. Classically, people always feel like, in their communities or they feel a sense of helplessness, like they can't do anything about the things that are going on around them. And too often, by the time something has happened, they feel it's too late to participate. But this is your children. These are your children, okay? And this is where it peels away from being just about everything else. So I do think that this generation coming up and starting to have children now, I think good on them. They have a leg up. They have a head. They're going to get to possibly make better or nuanced decisions because, well, hopefully because of films like ours and from reporting like Brandon's and just more awareness and conversation, that they won't start out so much in the dark. But for parents who are already on this track or who have been so devastated by it, we need those voices. We need Amy. We need every Amy, Helen, and Bill out there to show up, to participate, and to be heard. Because frankly, I don't think Biden understands this issue, and or whoever is going to sit in the White House. I mean, bottom line is we need an education that's that's not. We don't need to sling politics and dogma at one another. We need to show the human condition. That's what we tried to do with the film. I think it's enlightening. I think that is how we enlighten one another, is by showing the human condition.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's essential. You don't want to be using politics to just rally people. And that's what's really happening right now. I think a lot of this is, we have a group of people we can appease and get voters around, but there are real lives being destroyed in the midst of this. And I appreciate both of you sitting down and chatting about this today. Looking forward to chatting again sometime very soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Billy. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. Go over to the show notes to see how you can download Exposing the Gender Lie, How to Protect Children and Teens from the Transgender Industry's False Ideology ebook, free from the Christian Post. And be sure to find out more about Dr. Jeff Myers and Summit Ministries at summit.org.